Welcome back, everybody. Today we're taking a deep dive into something really, really fascinating.
Oh, yeah.
The science of spiritual practices.
Yeah.
You know, things like prayer or meditation.
Right.
It's like science is finally kind of catching up
Yeah.
to what people have been experiencing for centuries.
Absolutely.
We've got some really fascinating research to unpack, so let's get started.
Yeah, it's really intriguing how researchers are actually using brain imaging and other tools to try and understand what happens when someone engages in these practices.
Yeah.
You know, for a long time, spirituality was seen as something completely separate from the physical world, but now we're kind of seeing those two worlds intersect
Yeah.
in some really, really interesting ways.
That's what's so cool about this.
Yeah.
Is like we're peeking behind the curtain
Yeah.
of these ancient practices and getting a glimpse
Yeah.
of what's going on in the brain.
Absolutely.
But I imagine trying to study something as personal and subjective as spirituality must come with some challenges.
Oh, absolutely.
Right.
One of the biggest hurdles is figuring out how to even define and measure spirituality.
Oh, yeah.
It's such a personal experience.
Right.
It's influenced by your beliefs, your culture, your individual journey.
Right. What feels spiritual for one person might be totally different for another.
Exactly.
So how are researchers even tackling that?
Well, they're using a combination of approaches.
Okay.
Think of it like this. They're trying to understand the landscape of spirituality from both the ground level and from like an aerial view.
Okay. I like that analogy.
Yeah.
So what's the ground level view?
That's where questionnaires come in.
Okay.
So researchers use these questionnaires to ask people about their feelings, their beliefs, their experiences related to spirituality. It's a way to tap into those subjective aspects that are so important.
So it's all about getting people to describe their inner world, their personal sense of the spiritual.
Exactly.
What about that aerial view then?
Well, that's where the high-tech tools come in.
Okay.
Things like EEG, fMRI, PET, and SPECT.
Wow.
These allow researchers to actually observe the brain and body in action.
Oh, okay.
Measuring things like brainwave patterns, blood flow,
Wow.
and even neurotransmitter levels during spiritual practices.
So they're literally watching the brain and body respond in real time.
Yeah.
That's incredible. Can you give us a quick rundown of these tools and what they reveal?
Imagine you're trying to understand how a city works.
Okay.
You could walk around and talk to people, getting their individual perspectives. That's your questionnaire.
Right.
But you could also observe the city from above, watching traffic flow, seeing which areas are bustling with activity.
Right.
That's what these brain imaging techniques allow us to do.
I love that. So walk us through some of these aerial views.
Okay.
What are we seeing when we use these different tools?
Let's start with EEG.
Okay.
EEG is kind of like listening to the electrical chatter of the brain. It's great for seeing quick changes in brain activity, but it's not as precise when it comes to pinpointing exactly where that activity is happening.
So EEG gives us the when, but not necessarily the where.
Exactly.
Got it. What about MEG? You mentioned that one earlier.
MEG is like EEG's more sophisticated cousin.
Okay.
It also measures electrical activity,
Okay.
but with much better spatial resolution, giving us a clearer picture of which brain regions are involved.
Okay, so MEG helps us zoom in a bit more.
Right.
And then there's the famous fMRI.
Yeah.
I always picture those colorful brain scans when I hear about fMRI studies.
Exactly. fMRI is like watching a city light up at night.
Okay.
It tracks blood flow to show which brain areas are most active during a specific task.
Right.
So if you're meditating, we can see which parts of your brain are lighting up as you enter that state of deep focus.
So it's like we're seeing the brain's response to these practices in action.
Yeah.
Fascinating. You also mentioned PET and SPECT.
Right.
How do those fit into the picture?
Think of those as giving us an even deeper layer of information. They use radioactive tracers to map brain activity and can even give us insights into the levels of different neurotransmitters, those chemical messengers that allow brain cells to communicate.
So PET and SPECT are like getting a behind-the-scenes look at the brain's communication network.
Exactly.
Okay, we've got our high-tech tools covered.
Yeah.
What are researchers finding when they use these tools to study people engaged in spiritual practices?
Right.
What's actually happening in the brain?
Well, there's no single spiritual center in the brain.
Okay.
It's more like a symphony of different brain regions all working together. And the specific areas involved can vary depending on the practice.
Okay.
But some key players keep showing up.
Like what? Give us the highlights.
One area that often comes up is the frontal lobes.
Okay.
Particularly a region called the prefrontal cortex.
Oh, okay.
This is the part of your brain involved in planning decision-making, focus, and self-control.
Interesting. So the part of the brain that helps us stay organized and make rational choices
Yeah.
is also involved in spiritual experiences.
That's right. And some research suggests that the frontal lobes might also play a role in experiencing that sense of awe and wonder
Right.
that often accompanies spiritual practices.
You know, that feeling of being completely captivated by something bigger than yourself.
Yeah.
Like when you're looking up at a starry night sky or listening to a piece of music that moves you deeply.
Exactly.
It's almost like your sense of self fades away.
Right.
And you're just absorbed in that moment.
Exactly. And it seems like the frontal lobes might be a key player in creating that experience.
Okay, so the frontal lobes are involved. What other brain regions are lighting up during these practices?
Another important area is the parietal lobes, which are located towards the back of the brain.
Okay.
They're involved in processing sensory information, spatial awareness, and our sense of self.
So how do the parietal lobes connect to spirituality?
Well, think about those moments when you feel a sense of unity or oneness with everything around you.
Okay.
Like the boundaries between you and the world seem to dissolve.
Yes, that feeling of interconnectedness that some people describe during meditation or prayer.
Right. Some researchers believe that changes in the activity of the parietal lobes might be contributing to that experience.
Wow.
It's like your brain is shifting its perception of where your self ends and the rest of the world begins.
Wow, that's pretty mind-blowing.
Yeah.
So we've got the frontal lobes for focus and awe,
Right.
the parietal lobes for our sense of self and unity.
Uh-huh.
What other brain regions are in the mix?
There's also the thalamus, which acts like a sensory relay station in the brain.
Okay.
It filters incoming sensory information and sends it to the appropriate areas for processing.
So it's like the brain's gatekeeper.
Exactly.
Deciding what information gets through and what gets blocked out.
Precisely. And some researchers believe that during spiritual practices, the thalamus might filter information differently, perhaps reducing the input from the external world and allowing for a deeper internal focus.
So it's like tuning out the distractions and turning up the volume on your inner experience.
Exactly.
Interesting. What about emotions?
Yeah.
We can't talk about spirituality without talking about feelings.
Right.
What's going on in the brain when we experience those deep emotions associated with spiritual practices?
That's where the limbic system comes in.
Okay.
It's a network of brain structures that plays a key role in processing emotions, motivation,
Okay.
and feelings of reward and connection.
The limbic system, isn't that also involved in our fight or flight response?
Yeah.
The one that kicks in when we're stressed or feel threatened.
It's the same system
Wow.
that helps us navigate our emotional landscape,
Okay.
whether we're facing danger or experiencing profound love and connection.
So this one system is involved in both our most primal reactions and our deepest spiritual experiences.
Yeah.
That's pretty remarkable. What specifically is happening in the limbic system during spiritual practices?
Well, one key structure within the limbic system is the amygdala,
Okay.
which is involved in processing emotions, especially fear and anxiety.
Right.
Some studies suggest that during spiritual practices like meditation activity in the amygdala actually decreases.
So it's like calming down the fear center of the brain.
Right.
That makes sense, considering the sense of peace and tranquility that many people describe during these practices.
Exactly. And then there's the hippocampus, another part of the limbic system, which is involved in forming new memories and connecting emotions to experiences.
Okay.
Some research suggests that the hippocampus might play a role in encoding the profound emotional experiences associated with spiritual practices, making them more vivid and memorable.
So if you have a powerful experience during meditation or prayer, the hippocampus might be helping to solidify that experience in your memory, making it more likely that you'll recall it later.
Exactly.
That's fascinating.
And we can't forget about the reward system, which is also part of the limbic system. This system is all about pleasure and motivation, and it plays a role in everything from enjoying a delicious meal to falling in love.
So how does the reward system tie into spirituality?
Well, some researchers believe that engaging in spiritual practices can actually activate the reward system, leading to feelings of joy, contentment, and even bliss.
Really?
It's like your brain is rewarding you for connecting with something meaningful and fulfilling.
So it's not just about calming the fear center or encoding memories. It's also about experiencing genuine pleasure and reward from these practices.
Exactly.
I'm starting to see how all these different brain regions work together to create the complex tapestry of a spiritual experience.
That's exactly it. It's not about one single brain area lighting up. It's about the intricate interplay of these different regions,
Right.
each contributing its own unique piece to the puzzle.
This is already so much to think about, and we haven't even touched on the physical changes happening in the body during these practices. I'm really curious to learn more about that.
Me too. But before we get there, I think it's important to acknowledge that this research is still in its early stages.
Right.
We're just beginning to understand the complex ways in which our brains and bodies respond to spiritual practices.
Yep.
But what we're learning has the potential to really change our understanding of who we are and how we connect to something greater than ourselves.
I'm with you on that, and I think our listeners are probably itching to hear about those physical changes too. So stay tuned, everyone. After a quick break, we'll explore what's happening beyond the brain and delve into some of the practical applications of this research.
That's good.
All right, so we've been talking about all the amazing things happening in the brain during spiritual practices, but it sounds like the effects go way beyond just our gray matter.
Oh, you're absolutely right. Our brains don't exist in isolation.
Right.
They're constantly communicating with the rest of our body. And this two-way street is a big part of what makes this research so fascinating.
Okay, so spill the tea. What kind of physical changes are we talking about?
Well, one of the most well-studied effects is something called the relaxation response.
I've heard of that. It's basically the opposite of that fight or flight stress response we talked about earlier, right?
Exactly. When the relaxation response kicks in, your heart rate and blood pressure go down, your breathing slows, and your muscles relax. It's like your whole body shifts into a calmer, more peaceful state.
That sounds amazing. Sign me up. Is this something that happens with all spiritual practices, or are certain ones better at triggering this relaxation response?
Many practices can trigger it, especially those that emphasize relaxation mindfulness or deep breathing. Things like meditation, certain types of prayer, or even gentle yoga can be very effective.
So it's not just about what you're thinking or believing, it's also about how your body is physically responding to the practice. I'm curious, are there any long-term health benefits to triggering this relaxation response regularly?
That's a great question, and it's something researchers are actively exploring. Some studies suggest that engaging in practices that trigger the relaxation response might be linked to a whole host of benefits, like improved sleep, reduced inflammation, and even a stronger immune system.
Wow. So potentially making these practices a regular part of your life could have some pretty significant payoffs for your overall health and well-being. That's pretty incredible.
It is. And it makes sense when you think about it. If you're constantly stressed out, your body is in that fight or flight mode all the time, which can take a toll over time. But if you're regularly engaging in practices that help you relax and de-stress, you're essentially giving your body a break and allowing it to reset and repair.
That's a great point. It's like hitting the pause button on the daily grind and giving your body a chance to recharge.
Yeah.
But I imagine there are also some challenges in studying these effects, right?
Oh, absolutely. Remember, we're talking about spirituality here, which is inherently subjective and influenced by so many factors.
Right. And we talked earlier about the challenge of defining and measuring spirituality.
Oh.
How do you even begin to design a study that can capture something so nuanced and personal?
It's definitely tricky. One of the biggest challenges is finding the right participants for these studies. What does it even mean to be an expert in a spiritual practice? Is it about how long you've been practicing, how often you engage, the intensity of your experiences, or something else entirely? It's a really complex question.
I can see how that would be a tough one to crack.
Yeah.
And even if you find people who you consider experts, how do you compare their experiences to those who are new to these practices or who don't engage in them at all?
Exactly. Creating appropriate comparison groups is essential for any scientific study, but it's especially difficult when you're dealing with something as variable as spirituality.
And then there's the whole issue of placebo effects, right?
Yeah.
We talked about that earlier. If someone believes that a particular practice is going to make them feel better, could that belief alone be enough to create some of the changes we're seeing in the brain and body?
That's a really important consideration. It's something researchers have to take very seriously when designing these studies. They need to make sure they're isolating the specific effects of the practice itself and not just the power of belief.
So it sounds like there are a lot of moving parts to consider when trying to study the science of spiritual practices. But despite those challenges, are researchers starting to uncover any practical insights that could help people in their everyday lives?
Definitely. One of the most exciting areas of exploration is the potential for these practices to improve mental health and well-being. There's growing evidence that practices like mindfulness meditation can be helpful for managing stress, anxiety, and even depression.
That's huge. So many people are struggling with these issues, and it's so encouraging to hear that something as accessible as meditation could make a real difference. Are there any other areas where this research is showing promise?
Another area that's generating a lot of interest is the connection between spirituality and pain management. Some studies suggest that engaging in certain spiritual practices can help people cope with chronic pain, perhaps by changing the way they perceive and experience pain signals in the brain.
Wow, that's incredible. So instead of just masking the pain with medication, these practices might be helping people change their relationship to pain on a deeper level.
Exactly. And this is just scratching the surface. Researchers are also exploring the potential benefits of spiritual practices for things like addiction recovery, improving relationships, and even enhancing creativity and cognitive function.
It seems like the possibilities are endless. But I want to go back to something you mentioned earlier about the challenges of studying spirituality. It sounds like there's still a lot we don't know.
No, absolutely. But that's what makes this field so exciting. There's so much left to explore, so many questions still unanswered. And the more we learn about the science behind these practices, the better equipped we'll be to harness their potential to improve our lives and our world.
I love that perspective. It's not about having all the answers. It's about embracing the mystery and continuing to have questions.
Exactly. And who knows, maybe some of our listeners will be inspired by what we've discussed today to explore these practices themselves and contribute to our collective understanding of this fascinating field.
That's a great point. This isn't just about scientists and labs. It's about all of us exploring our inner worlds and discovering what works for us.
Absolutely. And the beauty of it is that you don't need any fancy equipment or degrees to get started. You can start with something as simple as taking a few deep breaths, noticing the sensations in your body, or spending a few moments in quiet contemplation.
Such great advice. It's a reminder that these practices are available to anyone, anywhere, at any time. And as we wrap up this deep dive, I think it's a powerful message to leave our listeners with.
I agree. It's about empowering people to take their well-being into their own hands and explore the incredible potential that lies within each of us.
It's like we've been on this incredible journey.
Yeah.
Through the brain and body, exploring all these intricate pathways and connections. And what's so cool is that this research is really just scratching the surface.
I know, right? It feels like we're at the very beginning of something truly groundbreaking.
Yeah.
And the more we learn about the science of spiritual practices, the more we realize how much more there is to discover.
It's like opening up a treasure chest and realizing that there are even more chests inside.
Right.
Each filled with their own mysteries and wonders.
That's a great way to put it.
Yeah.
And what's exciting is that this research has the potential to touch so many different aspects of our lives.
Right.
We've talked about the potential benefits for mental and physical health.
Yeah.
But it goes even deeper than that.
Okay. I'm intrigued. What else is there?
Well, think about the implications for our understanding of consciousness.
Okay.
For centuries, philosophers and scientists have debated the nature of consciousness, trying to understand how this subjective experience of the world arises from the physical matter of the brain.
Right. It's the age-old mind-body problem.
Exactly.
How do we explain something as intangible as consciousness?
Yeah.
In terms of neurons firing and synapses connecting.
Exactly. And while this research certainly doesn't solve that problem, it does offer some intriguing clues by studying what happens in the brain during these profound spiritual experiences. We're gaining a deeper understanding of how our inner world, our subjective sense of self, is connected to the physical processes happening in our brains and bodies.
So it's like we're starting to bridge the gap between the subjective and the objective.
Yeah.
Between the inner world of experience and the outer world of measurable phenomena.
I think that's a great way to put it. And as we continue to explore this intersection of science and spirituality, I think we're going to uncover even more surprising and thought-provoking insights into what it means to be human.
I completely agree. And as we wrap up this deep dive, I'm wondering if there's anything else you'd like our listeners to take away from all of this.
I think the biggest takeaway is that this research is ultimately about empowering people. It's about giving them tools and insights that can help them live healthier, more fulfilling, and more meaningful lives.
That's such a powerful message. It's not just about accumulating knowledge.
Right.
It's about applying that knowledge to make a real difference in our lives and the world around us.
Right. And remember, you don't need to be a scientist or a spiritual guru to benefit from these practices.
Right.
There are so many simple things you can do to incorporate these principles into your daily life, even if you only have a few minutes to spare.
I love that. It's a reminder that even small changes can have a big impact. So
yeah.
For our listeners who are feeling inspired to explore some of these practices, where can they start? What are some simple steps they can take today?
One of the easiest and most accessible practices is mindfulness meditation. You can start by simply finding a quiet place, closing your eyes, and focusing on your breath. Notice the rise and fall of your chest, the gentle flow of air in and out of your nostrils as thoughts arise. Simply acknowledge them and let them go, returning your attention to your breath.
That sounds so simple, yet so powerful, just taking a few moments to tune in to your breath and quiet the chatter of your mind.
Exactly. And you can do this anytime, anywhere, while you're waiting in line at the grocery store, sitting at your desk at work, or even lying in bed before you go to sleep.
I love that idea. It's like a mini vacation for your mind, a way to reset and recharge no matter where you are or what you're doing.
It really is, and as you become more comfortable with mindfulness meditation, you can start to explore other practices like gratitude journaling, spending time in nature, or engaging in acts of kindness and compassion.
Those are all fantastic suggestions. It's a reminder that spirituality doesn't have to be complicated or esoteric. It can be as simple as appreciating the beauty around us, connecting with others, and finding moments of peace and stillness in our everyday lives.
Beautifully said, and I think that's a perfect note to end on. Remember, the journey of exploring spirituality is a deeply personal one. There's no right or wrong way to do it. The most important thing is to find what resonates with you, what brings you joy, and a sense of connection to something greater than yourself.
So true. And for our listeners who are ready to embark on this journey, we hope this deep dive has provided some inspiration and guidance. Remember, keep exploring, keep asking questions, and keep an open mind. You might be surprised by what you discover about yourself and the world around you.
Well said. It's been such a pleasure diving into this fascinating topic with you and our listeners.
Likewise. And to our amazing listeners, thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the world of spirituality and the brain. We hope you'll join us again for our next exploration of the incredible mysteries of our world. Until then, keep learning, keep growing, and keep diving deep